Hi, my name's Geoff Revill. I'm the Managing Director and co-founder of SafeSpace One. We're a digital platform provider and developer for delivering mental health services in a teletherapy context. So that's video conferencing and a platform for the delivery of those kinds of services. In today's talk, what I want to talk to you about is cookies, trackers, and websites. It's our basic and simple premise that the confidentiality of our clients is paramount, and therefore the way in which we engage with them in terms of looking for them to come to us for their services needs to take into account that the internet as a whole is a massive tracking tool and largely is trying to profile people and obtain information around them, including the fact that they're suffering a mental health problem. And that can be used for subsequent targeting, obviously for advertising. The big issue is, of course, as has been shown by things like Cambridge Analytica, that such information and profiling can be used for other purposes and really undermines the basic premise that we should do no harm at all or no digital harm when we're dealing with our clients and patients. So this is a little bit of a platform to help you understand a little bit more about cookies as marketeers and trackers and the law, and just to give you an oversight of the things to look for and the things to ask for when you're having a website built for your digital service provision. So here you can see in the background I've got an Excel spreadsheet. What I've done is I've gone over around about 60 odd, bit over 60 websites who are providing digital services, digital support for people who are suffering mental health disorders of various types. I have not disclosed, as you can see here, I've hidden columns A and B, the company names and websites that I have been analysing here for purposes that, or for reasons that will become obvious as we go through the presentation. So hopefully this will help you out. It's worth just sort of talking about a couple of little stories, and one of the reasons I did this was in the early days of the platform development. I was talking with another mental health service provider, and they'd been acquired, and they had a rather large amount of money, and they were considering buying other digital platform providers, and they thought there was one that sounded a bit like what we were doing. So of course I went and checked them, and I thought, no, it's completely different, it's nothing to do with us, so I was able to confirm that back to this company. But what was also interesting, because I do this kind of thing, I noted that this website had more than 30 third-party cookies and trackers on the website, and that the forum-type environment that they provided claimed that the users could be assured of their anonymity. And given that they were sharing the fact that you had visited this website to 20, 30 different companies, it was pretty much guaranteed that that anonymity claim was completely irrelevant and bogus. And I highlighted this back to that company, back to the company that was thinking of acquiring that company. I'm pleased to say a couple of months later, it's very notable that they've cleaned up their website and there are no cookies at all. So it doesn't take much work to figure this out once you've had it pointed out to you. And I would say as a general observation, as an expert in this area, I would say that despite all these little orange markers on here, it looks to me like the majority of people in our sector are trying to respect people's rights, their confidence, confidentiality and privacy. It doesn't mean they're succeeding, and there are definitely some standout cases of organisations that are not only not succeeding, but explicitly not seeking to share information highly inappropriately. So, what I've done here is I'm going to go through each of these headers here and just take you through the study and the method. So I used a tool called Blacklight from a company called The Markup, written by Suyar Matu. It's a very good little tool. It's one of many that are out there, but it gives a very quick overview of how many trackers and cookies that are on there, what type they are, whether or not they're doing rather naughty things on your website. It is worth noting that as a tool, it's like a little web crawler. It is possible to block it. So just because in some cases I'm showing no cookies and no trackers on a website does not mean that there are no cookies and no trackers. It's possible that that company may have blocked a web crawler, or indeed it may have been very good in its implementation, and not very many are, and doesn't drop any cookies at all until you've been through a consent process, which of course the bot didn't do. It is so therefore it's very interesting to note how many were still showing their cookies despite the fact that we were using a bot. The very fact that we could even see cookies shows that they were not compliant with the law, particularly the EPrivacy regulation, which I'll come to a bit later. So, on average, around the whole globe, in terms of ad trackers on websites, you're probably looking at about 7. So the good news is the average I found here was about 4. So that's lower than the average that's out there. But these things are used to build advertising profiles to identify you for the purposes of targeted advertising. And of course, that identification is related to the fact that you're visiting the website of a digital mental health service provider, which is very useful context for profiling your state of mind, stuff that we probably don't really want to encourage. The second thing is, how many third-party cookies, and these are explicitly advertising tracking companies that you have chosen to enable on your website. The averages around the world is 3. The average here was 5, possibly skewed by a few rather horrendous outliers that we saw. But the inclusion of those sorts of cookies is an explicit decision. Usually it's a monetization activity. So these companies that are using this are probably utilizing these cookies in order to generate an income stream. But what they're really doing is undermining the privacy rights and confidentiality of their visitors because they're sharing that data inappropriately. So these two are kind of interesting. As you can see here, we've got a few zeros. We've got a few horrendous ones up in the larger end of the spectrum. Here we got one with 28, believe it or not. This was a particularly naughty person doing a lot of inappropriate things as far as tracking is concerned in their particular sector. There's another one down here with a total of 50 trackers and third-party cookies on their website. So there's definitely a few outliers that are really skewing the numbers of our relatively small sample, but quite scary that they're actually doing it. Then I looked at this tool also then did something quite useful. It really tries to identify whether or not there's a tool placed on the platform on the web that's designed to evade blockers. So in fact, it tracks using other techniques that, if you were to install a cookie blocker of some sort, they would still be able to collect identifiable information about you as a user and share that information. And it does that by secretly drawing an image on your browser when you visit the websites, and then that identifies your device. So good news is not too many were doing that, but unfortunately we did get a couple. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 of them explicitly trying to dodge cookie blockers, which is not a good sign. So the next area is session recording. So a session recorder is basically keeping an eye on your mouse movement, where you tap on the screen, where you scroll around, the degree of your network activity, perhaps in terms of throughput, and it compiles this data into a sort of video heat map that website owners can then review later to see how you interact with the website. So for most purposes, it's really designed as a means of trying to enhance the website itself. However, research has shown that this methodology is insecure and can make sensitive user data such as passwords and credit card information more vulnerable to attack or access. And certainly if you're using passwords on your websites, I'd kind of advise you wouldn't want that. The general view I would have on session recording, great little tool, great to use in a pilot stage for the website, to validate and review it. But you should definitely remove it in a live website, particularly in the mental health sector. There's no need for that, because you should be able to get all the data you need from a small sample, not from continuous aggregation of what's going on. The next area is keystroke logging. So it's capturing the text that you type in before you hit a submit button. So this could be used, for example, if you've got questionnaires, somebody starts typing a question and then changes their mind, you can see what they thought about writing as well as what they actually wrote. And so that's not really a good thing. That kind of information should not be seen by you or anybody else until I, as the visitor, decides that I've decided what information I want to impart. And they certainly don't expect you to know what you thought about writing before you changed your mind. It has been used as a mechanism to identify anonymous web users by matching them to postal addresses and real names. So you really got to be careful with this one. It's another technique that is questionable as to whether or not you really need it on your website and its value. And as you can see, luckily, very few people are actually using that technique, but anybody using it is a bad thing. So this next one is really quite stunningly bad. 2 out of 5 websites we reviewed, out of that's 50 to 60 of that we looked at, is dropping what's called a Facebook pixel tracker. So Facebook wants to build up a profile around you, and one of the ways it does that, even if you don't have a Facebook account, is to collate information on you as an identifiable individual, what websites you're going to, and so that they can then build that into their very detailed profile and database of you. So really, there's no value, or should be no value, for you as a mental health practitioner sharing that information with Facebook, who we know will sell it to anybody for any purpose without restriction. There is really no constraint on that. So definitely shouldn't be using Facebook pixel trackers. I have a strong suspicion that there are some companies who have probably just been putting Facebook links in or something like that onto some of their more social pages, not realizing they're using software libraries that also drop this pixel tracker as well. So it could be that a good proportion are not realizing what they're doing, but I have a suspicion far too many do and really shouldn't. Google Analytics. Now this is an interesting one. Most people just kind of think Google Analytics, it's all about visiting the website, and there's really no danger to us using Google Analytics on our website. Actually there is. So even if you don't use the remarketing feature, first of all, Google Analytics, when you set it up, the default in most cases will turn on something called remarketing audiences. And that enables the individual to be tracked and targeted for advertising, which again goes back to their profile and building up this Google knowledge base of who you are and what you're interested in and what you're concerned about right now. And these are the kinds of things that probably shouldn't be done. So that one absolutely should be consented. And this links to my next column here in a second, which is about privacy compliant cookie banners. I suspect again many of the users of Google Analytics didn't realize they were having remarketing audiences turned on, and that needs explicit consent. It's also very debatable whether or not Google Analytics itself should be explicitly consented. In my view, it should. Anything that risks collating identifiable information about an individual should be consented, and the analytics should be something that somebody opts into. So I would suggest that you should be very careful about that. There are third-party platforms that you can use, third-party library tools that you can use to replace Google Analytics, give you all of the same useful information about where people went on your website and their dwell times and that kind of stuff. So look around for something like Matomo, for example. It's a pretty good one. There are a number of others out there. You can replace Google Analytics as something that's far more, shall we say, confidence-inspiring and privacy-preserving than Google tends to be. And finally, took a look at these websites in the context of EPrivacy. So what is EPrivacy? Because you probably think GDPR before anything else. Actually, GDPR is not really the key bit of legislation to look at when you're looking at cookies. There's something called EPrivacy, which is based on a law from 2002 called the Privacy of Electronic Communication Directive. And that is being replaced by the PECR, the Privacy and Electronic Communication Regulation, which is a kind of compatriot piece of legislation to go alongside the GDPR. It was meant to have been done around about the same time as the GDPR came into law, but as you could probably imagine, the marketing sector has been lobbying and fighting it really hard. There's this general idea that because you go online, everything you do and everything you say and every communication you have should be trackable so that they can target you for advertising. My general view is for mental health, no, that doesn't hold true. And EPrivacy should be giving people the individual rights to opt out of any kind of tracking. And the marketing organizations out there are very much against that. So, or the advertising agencies and those sorts of people very much are. So you need to be very much careful of EPrivacy and have a look at that. But in general, the guidance of EPrivacy as it stands now in the context of the GDPR is that you need to be ensuring that any third-party trackers or ad trackers that you've dropped are explicitly consented in a manner that makes it obvious that A, that you're doing it, and B, that you can opt out, and making it easy to opt out. You can, of course, just consent automatically for necessary cookies to run the website, like a login or something like that. And you can offer options around analytic cookies and those sorts of things that are potentially risky. At least you should. And looking through, I'd say, about a third of these, and this is a personal view, because there's no law that kind of says what is a good privacy cookie banner, consent banner right now. But there is best practice that's out there. And looking through these websites, I was quite surprised. Only around about one in three were what I would call truly compliant. Some of them fell foul because I think they tried to be compliant as websites, but then perhaps had Google Analytics remarketing audiences turned on, so they weren't getting compliant consent for an activity that should have been consented, for example. So there's things like that probably caught a few of them out. So probably more than half were trying to be compliant, and just some of them were failing. But what's interesting is how many were non-compliant, just even to the basics. And the ones where I put question marks in, it's debatable as to whether or not, and very subjective as to whether or not they were compliant or not. Very often that would be the case if I saw them doing something that's utilizing something which is often called dark patterns, which is a general term across the internet. A dark pattern is where you effectively try to misdirect an individual to think that they're agreeing to something that they're happy with, when in fact they just agreed to something that's perhaps completely the opposite. And unsurprisingly, this company here, which had such a large number of cookies and were doing session recording and dropping Facebook pixel trackers and that sort of thing, had very much a consent banner that I thought was highly misdirectional. It was actually quite interesting because you could argue that it was legal, but actually the way in which it asked the questions would confuse most people, and so it was kind of interesting to me that this particular website, this particular provider, knew exactly what they were doing and were deliberately trying to dodge the law with their consent methodology. So, like I say, they are an extreme, but it's quite surprising, just how many are really not getting into the high percentages on this. And this should be a relatively straightforward thing to do. There's plenty of good practice out there. You can visit the ICO website itself and see how they do their consents, and follow that model. It's relatively straightforward, and you should be open and transparent. The same way as you would with a patient, if you were giving them support, then I think the website should be doing the same thing. So I hope you found that little run through useful. It's just a quick view, kind of a heads up to say, think about it. Think about your website. Don't just hand it off to a third party and say, build this for me, without being very clear. Please don't put Facebook pixel trackers on there. Please make sure that you use a privacy preserving analytics tool. Don't put keystroke capture on. Don't put session recording on, except perhaps in an early test and validation phase. And don't use any cookies that you don't need to. There's really no need for any third-party cookies in the majority of cases for most of these sorts of websites. So hopefully you found that useful. If you're interested in more, then you can come to our little vignette that we're doing on Thursday, where I'll be talking about ethics in digital marketing in the context of the mental health sector. And so if you've seen this video first, please go and see that one too in a replay. If you haven't had a chance to see us live, I think you'll find that the bigger picture stuff that we talk to will be very useful. And I also did a talk, a little pre-recorded vignette on anonymity and the fact that it really doesn't exist and is widely abused as a term in marketing, and digital marketing in particular, so that you can go and see that video too. So anyway, thanks very much for your time, and hopefully talk to you again soon in the future. Bye-bye.